It all started on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, just like any other. The sun was out, the streets were alive, and the world kept spinning, unaware that within the hour, an event would unfold that would shake an entire police department to its core. No one saw it coming. Not the officers on patrol, not the passers-by who paused to stare, and certainly not the woman they thought was just another suspect. She looked ordinary, in jeans and a soft gray hoodie, standing at a bus stop with her phone in one hand and a small grocery bag in the other. To anyone watching, she was just another woman waiting for the next bus. But something about her caught the attention of two nearby officers. Maybe it was her calm presence, or maybe it was the fact that she was black, standing alone in a quiet part of town. For reasons they'd later struggle to explain, they decided she looked suspicious. That's where it began. The cruiser pulled up slowly. At first, she didn't even notice. Then came the voice from the speaker. "Ma'am, step away from the bench. We need to ask you a few questions." She looked up, confused. Her first words were calm, measured. "Is there a problem, officers?" One of them stepped out, hand resting on his belt, eyes already hard. "We've had reports of theft in the area. You match the description." She frowned. "I just came from the market. You can check my bag if you'd like." Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't afraid. But something in her eyes changed the moment the second officer circled behind her. It wasn't fear. It was calculation. Like someone running through a dozen options in her mind. And yet they didn't see it. They didn't see her for who she was. They didn't see the years of service, the international missions, the classified files with her name all over them. To them, she was just another black woman. Another problem, and that blind spot would cost them everything. They didn't bother to check her ID, didn't run her name. They assumed, acted, grabbed her arm as she tried to reach for her phone, claiming resisting. She didn't shout, didn't cry, just looked them dead in the eyes and said, "You're making a mistake." But it was too late for warnings. Within minutes, they had her in cuffs. She didn't fight back, she didn't have to, because the moment they placed her in the back of that cruiser, something changed. Somewhere in a sleek, glass-walled government, building miles away, a silent alarm had been triggered. And when the agency she worked for, an agency so deeply embedded in national intelligence that even most senators didn't know her full name, realized she'd gone off-grid, they responded. Swiftly. The story would soon hit every screen in the country. But in that moment, on that street, all that mattered was the injustice unfolding in real time. Because this wasn't just a wrongful arrest. This was a violation of trust, dignity, and basic human rights. And it wasn't the first time this had happened, but it just might be the last. As the officers drove away, they smirked and joked among themselves, not realizing the woman they just detained had once trained field operatives in 6 different languages. She'd infiltrated war zones, advised presidents, and stared down world leaders. But in that patrol car, she was just another nameless target in a broken system that didn't care who she really was. Back at the station, things escalated quickly. They tried to process her, asked her questions she refused to answer. "You're going to want to make one phone call," she finally said, "and I suggest you do it now, before this goes further." But arrogance is a stubborn thing. They ignored her warning. They searched her things, found nothing, and still they pressed on, until the silence on the other end of the holding cell hallway was broken by the sharp sound of boots hitting the moor. Tile floor, a man in a tailored black suit appeared. No badge, no name tag, just authority that hung in the air like electricity. He showed no expression, just a slight nod to the woman behind the glass, and then turned to the desk sergeant. "This woman is under federal protection," he said simply. "You're going to let her go now." The room froze. One officer, the same one who had cuffed her, stepped forward. "Who are you?" But the man didn't respond. Instead, he handed over a sealed envelope and said one word. "Read." Inside was a document so classified the sergeant's hands trembled holding it. Faces turned pale. The woman in the cell watched it all unfold, unmoved. She'd seen worse, and yet even now she said nothing. She didn't gloat, didn't threaten, just waited. Because this wasn't just about her. It was about every time something like this had happened. Every time someone was stopped, searched, judged, and dismissed because of the color of their skin. Every time someone said, "You fit the description." She was done being silent. And now so was the agency she worked for. And while that storm was brewing behind government walls, something else was happening miles away in a different part of the city. A young black teen, just 16, in jeans and a hoodie not unlike the woman's, stood up on a crowded bus and gave his seat to a tired, pregnant white woman. He didn't know her. She didn't ask. But he saw the way she held her back and quietly offered his spot. No big speech, just kindness. She sat down with a grateful sigh. Then, as the bus bumped down the road, she reached into her purse, scribbled something on a piece of paper, and handed it to him before getting off at the next stop. He opened it and froze. The words on the note didn't just change his day. They changed his life. But that's another part of this story. Right now, the woman the officers had arrested stood at the heart of a storm, about to tear through a department built on arrogance and assumptions. Phones were ringing. Lawyers were moving. The media hadn't even caught wind yet. But when they did, they'd uncover a chain of misconduct stretching back years, all triggered by a single unlawful arrest. And this time, they hadn't picked a powerless target. They picked the CIA, and the CIA doesn't forget. The fallout was only beginning. Careers would end, lawsuits would pile up, and the woman who once operated in the shadows was stepping into the light, not just for herself, but for every voice that had been silenced before her. But before any of that came to pass, she stood quietly in the center of that police station, looking the officers in the eyes, calm, unbroken, because she knew something they didn't. They had no idea what was coming next. And neither do you. She didn't flinch as the officers stood, frozen, unsure of what to do next. Her wrists still bore the red marks from the cuffs. The silence in the room was thick, and no one wanted to be the first to speak. The man in the black suit turned to the lead officer slowly and said, "You just unlawfully detained one of this country's most valuable intelligence assets. You have no idea what you've done." Even then, the officer tried to stand tall. "She didn't identify herself," he mumbled, eyes shifting, his earlier arrogance now replaced by a creeping sense of fear. But she did. She had told them. Clearly they were making a mistake. They just didn't listen. Because in their eyes, someone like her couldn't be more than what they assumed. A threat. Suspicious. Dangerous. That unspoken bias had spoken louder than any ID ever could. The man in the suit tapped his earpiece and gave a nod. Within seconds, 2 more agents walked in through the front doors. Calm, focused, no wasted movement. They carried a presence that silenced everyone in the room. The sergeant, who had until now tried to play it safe, stepped back and whispered, to no one in particular. "She's really CIA, but she wasn't just CIA. She was someone they called when negotiations failed, when diplomacy ran out of time, and when the stakes were too high to make mistakes. She had done her job so well, for so long, that even her co-workers didn't know the full scope of what she'd handled. And now, standing in the middle of a local police department treated like a common criminal, she saw all the pieces fall into place. She didn't speak. Not yet. She wanted them to sit in the weight of their choices. Every second ticked by louder than the last. The agents escorted her out without another word, but not before one of them leaned close to the lead officer and said, "Expect a call. This doesn't end here." Meanwhile, as the sun dipped lower, the sky, the young teen who had given up his seat sat on a bench outside the bus station, still holding the note in his hand. His name was Jordan. Just 16, raised by a single mother, smart in ways most people didn't take the time to see. He wasn't rich, didn't have the newest shoes or the best phone, but he had something rare. Kindness that asked for nothing in return. He kept reading the note over and over again as if he was afraid the words might vanish. It wasn't just a thank you, it was a message from someone who clearly wasn't an ordinary passenger. At the bottom, under the handwritten lines, was a name he'd only ever seen on the news. Someone connected to a powerful tech foundation that gave full scholarships to young students from underrepresented communities. Someone who had once turned a $50 startup into a billion-dollar nonprofit. The message read, "Your small act of kindness reminded me of something I once forgot. Send your school information to this address. Don't stop being who you are." Jordan sat still, stunned. For someone like him, who didn't even know how he'd pay for next semester's books, this could change everything. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't know yet, was that this note was just the start. It would eventually tie him to something much bigger than himself, to the very woman who had been arrested, to a quiet fight for justice that was brewing behind the scenes. Because nothing happens in a vacuum. Back at the agency, the woman, whose name had still not been released to the public, sat in a secure room, eyes scanning a laptop screen filled with internal reports. Already, news of her arrest had been scrubbed from local systems. Body cam footage had been locked down. She read through a document detailing the officer's past conduct. Complaints. Incidents brushed under the rug. Citizens who had walked away bruised and unheard. And she made a decision. This couldn't be swept under the rug like everything else. Not this time. Not when she had the power and the connections to expose it all. For years, she had remained in the shadows. It was her job to observe, to gather intelligence, to work silently. But now, that silence felt like complicity. She stood and walked to the large glass window that overlooked the city skyline. Below, the world moved as usual. Cars honking, people hurrying along, lives continuing without pause. But up here, something was shifting. Her name was Amara. And what the officers didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that she had already begun writing a private report to a congressional oversight committee 2 weeks ago. A report about systemic abuses she'd seen across state lines. A report that had gone ignored. Until now. Her arrest gave it fuel. Visibility. A human face. A story. People were more likely to listen now. She turned to the agent standing by. "The door." "Tell Langston I'm ready. We'll go public if we have to." The agent hesitated. "Are you sure? Once this goes out, there's no taking it back." Amara's voice was steady. "I was silent when I thought change could happen quietly. That didn't work." As the word spread internally, chaos unfolded behind the scenes in the department that had arrested her. Officers whispered to each other nervously, trying to figure out how bad it was. The chief was summoned for an emergency meeting. Legal advisors were called in. One officer tried to delete his body cam footage before realizing it had already been secured by federal agents. Another tried to call in sick, knowing what was coming. And the woman who had once been reduced to matching the description was now preparing to address the very system that had tried to erase her. Across the city, Jordan walked into his mother's small apartment and quietly handed her the note. She read it once, then again, then looked up with tears in her eyes. "What did you do, baby?" "I just gave up my seat." She pulled him into a hug and whispered, "You've always been more than enough." And still, the threads between these two stories hadn't come together yet. But they would. Very soon. Because the woman they arrested was about to speak, and the world would listen. 2 days passed, but the story hadn't hit the news yet. Not officially. There were whispers, quiet messages in encrypted group chats, and a few anonymous posts on social media claiming a CIA officer had been wrongfully arrested by local police. Most people dismissed them as rumors. But inside government offices and law enforcement circles, panic had already begun to spread. At the precinct, things were tense. Officers kept their heads down, unsure who was being watched. The department had received a quiet notification from Internal Affairs. An audit was underway. Files were being pulled. Calls were being recorded. Every move felt like it was under a microscope. The officer who cuffed Amara, Officer Brent Tully, tried to act like it was all routine. He told his partners he had nothing to hide, but his silence in the locker room said otherwise. What made it worse was that no one could explain how it had escalated so quickly. It was supposed to be a simple stop, a check-in. But Brent had acted on instinct, the wrong kind. Now his badge was being reviewed and the department lawyer wouldn't even meet him in person. All he had was a voicemail saying, "Don't talk to the press, don't post anything, don't reach out to her." But Brent couldn't let it go. He needed to understand who she was. He stayed up late, digging through articles and piecing together bits of her identity. The more he found, the worse he felt. She had served overseas, advised on international security, helped rescue hostages. She was someone his own brother, a Marine, had probably heard of. And yet, when he looked at her that day, all he saw was what his training and his bias had prepared him to see. Across town, Amara sat in a dimly lit conference room, scrolling through files sent to her by a trusted contact at the Department of Justice. They included reports of excessive force from the same precinct, complaints from Black and Latino residents that had gone ignored. Some were years old, others were recent. All were buried under piles of paperwork. She knew this wasn't just about her arrest anymore. It was about something far bigger. The patterns, the silence, the quiet damage done by people who thought no one was watching. She opened a folder labeled Community Incidents, Internal Notes, and paused on a name. Jordan. He was listed in a side note. Nothing criminal. Just a vague notation that his neighborhood was a known area for youth disturbances. That simple line was enough to flag him in the system, to make any future interaction with police a little more dangerous. Amara stared at it for a long time. She'd never met Jordan, but she had read the message he received from the woman on the bus, the donor who had since contacted her directly, offering to help in any way. And now she saw a chance to connect these two quiet stories, her own and Jordan's. Because at the core of both was the same truth: how easily people could be dismissed, reduced to assumptions. Back in Jordan's world, things were shifting too. His school principal called him into the office, a curious look on her face. She handed him a sealed envelope. Inside was a formal letter from the foundation mentioned in the note. It wasn't just a scholarship, it was an invitation to a youth leadership program that trained high school students in public speaking, law, and civic activism. They wanted him to speak at a gathering next month, on kindness, on courage. He looked up, wide-eyed. "Why me?" The principal smiled. "Maybe because someone saw something in you that we all should have seen sooner." Jordan didn't feel ready. He wasn't used to standing in front of people, telling his story, but something in him shifted. He began to understand that small moments could carry real weight, that maybe his voice mattered more than he realized. As Jordan prepared for something that could change his future, Amara was preparing for something that might change everything else. She scheduled a private meeting with a local journalist she had once protected during an overseas crisis. She didn't plan to reveal classified information, only her experience, her arrest, and the facts she had uncovered since. The journalist, Maya, agreed to meet in person. They sat across from each other in a quiet diner, away from microphones and cameras. Maya listened without interrupting as Amara laid out the sequence of events, the bias, the silence, the long list of ignored reports. When she finished, Maya sat back and whispered, "Do you want to go public?" "I want the truth out," Amara said. "But more than that, I want people to feel it. I want them to see how quickly this could happen to anyone, how fast someone's life can shift based on nothing but assumptions." Maya nodded. "If we do this, it won't be easy. You'll get attention, good and bad." Amara looked out the window, watching people pass by. "I've operated in war zones. I'm not afraid of attention. I'm afraid of silence." Meanwhile, Officer Brent couldn't sleep. His hands kept shaking. He replayed the arrest in his head again and again. Her words echoed, "You're making a mistake." But he didn't listen. Now, as he scrolled through news headlines quietly surfacing online, none of which mentioned his name yet, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Guilt. Not just for what he did, but for how often he'd let things slide. Watched his colleagues do worse, laughed at locker room jokes, dismissed citizens' complaints without reading the full reports. It wasn't just about Amara anymore. It was about what he had become, Still, no one from the department had contacted him directly. No one offered support. He was just hanging, waiting. And that silence said more than words ever could. The pressure was rising everywhere. In the agency, in the community, in Jordan's school, in the press. Everyone was waiting for something to break, for the full truth to come out, for someone to step forward with the whole story. And yet, for now, it all remained just under the surface. Wires quietly buzzing, secrets held tight. The storm hadn't hit yet,